All right, so welcome everybody. So excited to see so many folks joining us today, especially as a motivation researcher. I'm always excited when people are also excited about students' motivation. So my name is Michael Barger. I'll be kind of the moderator today. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Georgia in the Applied Cognition and Development program. I'm really excited to introduce Chris Holmes today. He's a gifted education specialist hailing from St. Louis, Missouri. He has had a 23-year career that does not only involve gifted education, but also journalism, teaching creative writing, psychology, history, literature, special education. And he's done many, many things within those roles, including developing a high school dropout prevention program, founding a private school for students who learn differently, and currently is in a role where he is creating a high school gifted program that focuses on creativity, introspection, metacognition, and development of the self. His pedagogical approach applies what we know about adolescent development to autonomous motivation and identity formation. And I'll also say that so many of these times in these spaces, these academic spaces where we hear people that have read lots of things and seen lots of things, Chris has really taken a bottom-up approach to seeing what students' experiences are like in order to inform our knowledge about student motivation, which I really appreciate. So in 2019, he was really perplexed by students' apparent apathy towards school and dissatisfied with those kind of top-down approaches, these expert solutions to what to do about student apathy. And so in order to kind of solve this problem and understand this problem, Chris has interviewed hundreds of teenagers around the country about motivation, about their school, and about their life. And that started about 4 years ago. And so this presentation is all about what Chris has learned. So I'm going to turn it over to Chris to tell us about all of this fascinating work that he's done.
Thank you very much. Gosh, all that makes me sound very old, which I guess I am. But feel young because I get to work with teenagers all the time. Good morning. Thank you for having me here and offering me this platform to share my experience. This project, which I've called Backtracking Apathy, started accidentally about a decade ago when I began noticing that no matter how much I motivated my students, and sometimes it was a little, sometimes it was a lot, it didn't last. Like the motivation just didn't really last. They were motivated for me, by me, but not by themselves or for themselves. And I needed to know why. It was almost at the point where I was contemplating, am I wasting my time in education if none of this is sticking, if I can't get them to the point of wanting to do something on their own, then what was the point? So I need to know why. Why are these teenagers not tapping into their interests and strengths and curiosity and creativity? Because we all have these tremendous gifts at different levels, but they were just okay with mediocrity. Why were they academically apathetic? So I had my thoughts. I've been teaching for a while, but I wanted to know what the academic community had discovered. So anyway, I went back to school and I studied educational psychology, and I learned what all the researchers said about the why. And while that was interesting and enlightening, it didn't help much in the classroom. No offense to any researchers, but it just confirmed what I suspected after 20 years in the classroom. We know why. We know why kids disengage from school. Researchers and teachers alike, but we're not so keen on how to consistently change that. Lots of strategies exist, a ton of scientific research too, but that didn't seem to be helping much in schools and classrooms, in the so-called trenches of day-to-day teaching. So the more I pored over the research and thought about my own practice, my own experiences in various high schools, the more I realized something was missing: student voice. What did students think? And I don't mean questionnaires, because there's a lot of that out there. I mean conversations, heart-to-heart, open-ended, candid conversations where the objective is to give students an opportunity to share their lived experiences about motivation and school and life. That's what this presentation is about: student voice, how it aligns with the research, how it's largely absent in many schools, and how to change that without reinventing our current educational system, without any additional financial investment. This is about acknowledging the why and discovering the how. So I don't think, it's called the Festival of Ideas. I don't think my idea, the idea of interviewing students across the country in malls or parks or Starbucks or whatever, is anything revolutionary. It's odd, maybe, living in the back of a pickup truck for 75 days, approaching teenagers I didn't know and asking them personal questions and about their thoughts and feelings. That's a little odd. But is it an act of creativity? Is the idea novel and useful? And I believe the answer to those questions is relevant, and hopefully by the end of this session, you will too. Whether you do or not, I'd greatly appreciate your feedback. And as Michael said, at any time during the presentation, if you would like to ask a question, feel free to interrupt me. I would love that. I think the conversation is probably more useful than the presentation. So I encourage that. So this morning, I'll be sharing some slides and talking about a few dozen informal conversations. At first, they started off exclusively teenagers, then gradually more and more adults, and I'll explain why. The impetus for the project began when I realized I was teaching journalism, that no matter how much I motivated my students, and sometimes it was a little, sometimes it was a lot, it rarely lasted. Like for the most part, they just weren't wanting to do it for themselves. So this idea started real quickly. I think I'll just share this. This idea started when I was with my grandson at the St. Louis Science Center. I'm going to share my screen real quickly. Okay, we can see that, yes?
Yes, we can.
Excellent, excellent. All right. To get this out of the way real quickly. Sorry, here, hold on a second. There we go. Oh, apologies. There we go. Okay, so my idea started in the Science Center gift shop. I was with my grandson. He was about 3 at the time, and I saw this gyroscope. I had one of these when I was a kid, and that I'm like, oh my gosh, Colin, I'll get you this gyroscope. We'll go home and mess with it. So I bought this gyroscope, and I set it up, and I ran the string through it, and I spun it and did all kinds of crazy things like gyroscopes do. And I put it on my finger, and I put it on a string, and my grandson is like, well, wow, that's crazy, Papa. And we, knocked it on the floor, and it's still spinning like crazy. And he's like, that's amazing. How's it do that? But eventually, what happens with the gyroscope is it slows down, and it eventually falls over. And in order to get it going again, you have to put the string around it and yank it again. And I had this epiphany, this idea that, oh my gosh, this is exactly what happens in school with teachers. This is what teachers do. We get them motivated. We yank the string, and they can do all kinds of crazy things. They're so talented. They're so amazing. But eventually, they slow down and get distracted, or something gets in the way, and they lose momentum and fall over, and we have to string it again to get them going again. And so I tried to imagine this gyroscope as a model for what it was that I was thinking about. So I don't even know if I'm pronouncing this right, but there's a Borromean or Borromean knot. Michael, maybe you can help me with this. But it's this knot where you have these 3 rings, and 2 rings are connected to one, but not to all 3. But if you take one out, they all fall apart. And this concept of this knot intrigued me in regard to self-determination theory. So as we know, self-determination theory, you've got 3 aspects: autonomy, relatedness, and competence, and they all make up intrinsic motivation. And I thought, what if you took the gyroscope and the rings were self-determination theory? So I asked a student, I said, can you make this on a 3D printer? And he said, yeah, I can do that. So this was the actual design on a 3D printer, and we made this. We made this model of this gyroscope that represents student motivation. So the idea is that we get the child in the center to somehow be able to control their own movement, so the teacher can step back and doesn't have to keep threading the string and yanking it. That's the goal of the teacher. So this is where I was with my thinking in regard to this project. And I felt that what I had to do was ask students to get to the heart of that. What would it take for those students to be able to drive their own gyroscope and keep it going without me? I had to talk to them. This data, to me, as a practitioner, and again, I'm not a scholar, I'm not a university professor, so I don't pour my life into the research. I do what I can in the time that I have as a practicing teacher, and there's limited time. So I don't know everything, but of what I read, there just didn't seem to be enough student voice. So I started to go out and collect it. So today you're going to hear several stories of adolescents, still snippets of them anyway, from their lived experiences and their perceptions of apathy and motivation, and what made them want to give up as teenagers, what made them want to dig in. This is about the missing variable in schools' so-called multiple measures of data. Schools like to proclaim that, oh, we look at all this data, these multiple measures, and they do, but they're missing that point of student voice. And I'm not talking about like Likert scale questionnaires, but actual conversations with teenagers and young adults. So most of these interviews, just a little bit of background before I go into this, most of the interviews were random and spontaneous. Lots of different skin colors, lots of zip codes, rural, urban, suburban, rich, poor, neither. People who had A's and C's and F's. I had an interview in the pouring rain with a teenage father who dropped out of a Washington, D.C. high school, and then 200 yards away had an interview with a Yale intern at the Capitol. Just fascinating contrast. But in spite of all the varied subjects in their stories, there were distinct trends that emerged from the interviews, what I would consider insights among all the demographics that might justify how we parent and teach teenagers. And so I'm going to share those now. Get those back up there. Okay. So I call this a roadmap to understanding academic disengagement among adolescents. And I don't know if I guess that's what it turned out to be. And if it isn't clear at the end what my findings, for lack of a better word, are, then please prompt me to explain it in a better way. This was the route that I took. I'm in St. Louis, and spring break, I did a little circle around the Midwest to get those states out of the way that would allow me enough time before the school year started between May and August to do all 48 contiguous states. So I started off, went to the Northwest, across the top, up to Maine, down to Florida, across the bottom to San Diego, and then across through Colorado back to St. Louis. This is where I lived for that time. Had a little pop-up tent in my pickup truck. I would basically drive in the mornings, find people to interview in the afternoons, and then type up notes at night, and then do it the next day. This was the last interview that I did. This was in Colorado Springs. This is Shalaka. She is now a medical student at the University of Rochester. At the time, she was a senior. And she was one of those kids who was a star. She just could do everything. When we talk about the so-called perfect student, great grades, a musician, an athlete, just the whole package. And so she applied to these elite schools and didn't get in. Got waitlisted at many of them and didn't get into some of them. She had phenomenal standardized test scores, just a great transcript, everything. And she was like, for the first time in her life, she's like, what's going on? I'm experiencing what I would consider to be failure. And so she processed this, and this is what she told me. And this is why I love this project, because when you sit down and talk with adolescents, granted, they're inexperienced, they lack emotional regulation, they lack wisdom, but their brains work really, really well. And if we take the time to set aside all those perceptions of what the teenager is and talk to them and listen, they're so insightful. I think Shalaka said one of the most insightful things that I heard on this journey. And this is what she said. I move this out of the way because I can't see this whole thing here. There we go. The way I see it, the best is a stagnant. So she's talking about having failed. The way I see it, best is a stagnant state of existence. Best is a place. It's a point. But better is, like, I know it sounds kind of corny, more of a journey than a destination. I'm trying to do that. Trying to do my better is what I like to say. And now she is absolutely thriving in med school. So wisdom that I think lots and lots of adults could take from this. Now, some of these comments are going to seem super random. Like this one doesn't fall into the categories I'm about to share with you. There are three kind of questions that I asked everyone on this trip, and that's what we're going to focus on. And many of the comments didn't fall in there, but there were trends, and I've organized those into trends. But sometimes I'll pull a quote just because I find it really, really insightful, and this is one of them. All right, so these were the three big questions. Again, Michael, if at any time anybody has a comment or question, please interrupt me and let me know. These were the three big questions that I asked. So I would interview someone, and the first thing I would do is say, hey, what was your high school experience like? Or what is your high school experience like? And that would typically take us down one of two routes. And the student would either say, oh, it's really good, I really like high school. Or more often than not, they'd say, oh my gosh. And then they'd go into what their struggle is with high school or was with high school. But I always ask three questions. So even though all the interviews went wherever those interviewees took them, I always had three questions, and these were the three questions. What is the most important thing adults should know about teenagers that they don't know? So I only asked teenagers this. I asked lots of adults. I interviewed a lot of adults on this journey too. This is a question I only asked the teenagers. What is the most important thing adults don't know that they need to know? The second one's, what's the biggest obstacle in your motivation towards schoolwork? And the last one was, what is the most important thing a teenager should learn in high school? Some of my favorite questions, that last one, I like them all, but that last one, a lot of high school teachers and administrators have not asked themselves this question or have not talked about this question. And it boggles my mind, like that is the ultimate goal. Like, what are we going after in educating an adolescent from 9th grade to 12th grade? If we were to rank it, what is the most important thing? And shouldn't we build our educational model around that thing or those things? So there were some interesting responses. These are the trends that came out. These were the ones when I coded and categorized them that were most prominent. So question one, most important thing adults should know. There were two. Yes, you were a teenager, but it's different today. And that's probably what every teenager said, but yet what I try to remember is the internet and social media and how that's simply radically changed, probably. And Anna, you can probably speak to this, probably neurologically, even though I don't know how we'd assess that today's adolescent is radically different. Their experience in adolescence is radically different than what it was when I was an adolescent, when I had 2.5 TV channels, 3 if the weather was good. It's just so different. And I think that's what students are saying when they're telling me this, that, yeah, I know you went through adolescence, but it's not the same game. The second one is, we're trying harder than you think. This came up a lot. Sometimes it's so weird. Like, I talk to these strangers, like 2 minutes after meeting this kid on the street and then not knowing them, they're teary-eyed talking to me about, I'm trying harder than my parents or my teachers think I'm trying. So those were the two main things that came up as far as answers to this question. Question two, the biggest obstacle in motivation, relationships. And it's funny. I don't know, maybe it's because I phrased these questions around school that they didn't talk about parents, but of the 235 interviews, not a single one, not just these 5, but not a single one mentioned conflict with parents, which I know as a teacher is a big thing. I know this, but it was interesting that in this experiment that didn't come up. So when they talked about relationships, they talked about 2 types of relationships. One was peer relationships, that was the dominant one, and the other was teacher relationships, which is also something that comes up here. A huge thing in their lack of motivation was academic choice. It's not like teenagers, whether they're so-called good students or average students or they struggle, it's not like they're not interested in learning. They're often not interested in learning what we think they need to learn. Especially being exposed to literally everything in the world, they're able to find their interests in ways that maybe a school curriculum doesn't meet, and that frustrates them. And it's hard to stay motivated when you're into something and you're not allowed to explore it. You have to do something else. And this was the one that was really, really hard for me. And it was a lack of support and a lack of respect from teachers. And I have thought a lot and read a lot about this particular topic. There's an author or a researcher and an author who I follow a lot. His name's John Marshall Reeve, who is one of the main researchers in self-determination theory, but his specialty is motivational style, a teacher's motivational style, which goes to what the kids who I interviewed were talking about as far as the qualities of a teacher, like what qualities does this teacher have who is motivating, and what qualities does this teacher have that's demotivating. So this came up a lot as one of the biggest obstacles in motivation, was lack of teacher support and respect. So those were those 3 main things. The next one, this question here, I don't want to tell you the answer first. I want, Michael, if you could ask people to write this in the chat, And I don't know how many people we have in this session, but if once they write this answer in the chat, and try to keep it to say 5 words, no more than 5 words. So I know that we can be really eloquent with our responses to this and in depth, but I'd like a response to this from everyone, and put it in the chat. What do you think is the most important thing a teenager should learn in high school? And then we're going to compare these to what the teenagers said. So if you just take a minute for people to jot that in the chat, if you're able. And Michael, if you could take a look at those and share some of those out once they're there.
Absolutely. First one, importance of exploration and grit. The importance of self-care. How to be an independent learner. Wisdom and adaptability. Appreciation, self-worth, common sense, finances, relationships, reading and visual literacy, cultural sensitivity, empathy, wellness, more of treating yourself well, coping skills, how to be successful after high school, respect, how to find answers, I assume not just to know answers, finances, emotion regulation and empathy, mental health, getting a lot of the kind of self-care, social, emotional learning kind of things, also how to find out answers, creativity, learning strategies. So again, not just knowledge, but how to learn. Managing stress and balancing it with school life. Financial literacy again, creativity, athletics.
Beautiful. We'll stop there. I know there are more coming in. We can go back to them later.
Basic math.
Yeah, so math came up once. So I interviewed 235 people, probably about 150 were teenagers, and the rest were young adults, or all the way up to a 70-year-old looking for coins on the beach. But only the adults talked about academic content, and it wasn't much. Like in here, the only thing that came up, math came up once, if I recall, and finances came up 3 or 4 times. So the personal finance, understanding personal finances, was the only academic thing that was mentioned in these interviews. Now, if I did 10,000 interviews, I'm sure there are other academic subjects that would come up, but in my little experiment, this is what came up. And most of them were exactly the kinds of things that all of you just shared. This is the order that they came in from the top 5 from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 that teenagers said, and look at how similar they are in the things that all of you just shared. 5 was how to be happy. They described happiness in lots of different ways, but happiness was a big one. How do I be happy? And they wish school helped with that. Not to say, hey, here's how you be happy, let's take a test so you memorize it, but guidance. Like so many times kids say, I don't want to be told things, I want to be guided. Like I want to figure them out myself, I just want help figuring them out. So the whole direct instruction, memorize, take a test, they're done. It's really hard. Not that that's not a good model in some cases, it can be. But they now get information from so many places, and they learn in so many different ways that for the dominant form of learning to be that is hard for them. And that was the struggle. So in this case, how to be happy, how to control emotions. So, you know, we know, and it's kind of been mainstreamed and probably distorted how these words, prefrontal cortex and executive functioning and all these words that now are in the mainstream, these terms. And students know them too. So they would tell me, yeah, I know that we don't become adults until our mid-20s. Yeah, we know that. Like they've heard this probably from their teachers or their parents. And they're kind of sick of it. But at the same, because they still want to know how to manage their emotions. I heard this all the time. Yeah, I feel this way and I know I'm supposed to because I'm 16 and I don't learn how to do that, but it doesn't change the fact that I want to know how to regulate that. I don't want to get mad. I don't want to get sad, or at least I want to manage the intensity of those feelings. So this was one of the things that came up time and time again. One girl, I had to get a haircut. I think she's in my presentation. I don't know where I was, maybe North Carolina again. But I had to get a haircut. So I went into this place. This is how weird this is to talk about sometimes. I went into this salon and they said, can I help you? And I said, yeah, I would like your youngest hairstylist. and not realizing just how weird and creepy and twisted that sounded. And then I explained the project real quickly, and they're like, "Oh, okay, you need Chelsea." So they brought this recent high school graduate, and she cut my hair, and we talked, and she had tattoos on her arms, on her forearms, that were related to messages to herself about controlling emotions. So this is how significant that was to her, is that she tattooed her arms about the importance of emotional control. 3 social skills: how to get along, communicate. I think that came up a lot in the responses that I heard from all of you. How to adult. So this came out in various forms, but and also kind of financial independence, but just being independent, how to live on my own. They really, really wished they had some guidance in that area. I don't know how much time you spend if you have children or if you work with teenagers, but by the time they get to senior year, even the cool ones, even the ones who act like no big deal, I don't care, like they don't care about anything, they care. And one of the things they care about is, how am I going to do this? How am I going to function on my own? And they're scared, even if they don't act like it. And so it's weird as I meet these kids on the street or wherever, and they're like, open up to me. They don't know me from Adam. And I think maybe that's why, because they don't have a relationship. They know they're never going to see me again. They just pour it out. And so many times they ask me, or they tell me at the end of the conversation, "Thank you." And I said, "No, thank you." Like, "No, you don't understand. No one asks. No one asks for what we feel and think about this stuff. So thank you." So anyway, independence. And then the top one was, who am I? You know, that question that we tend to ask them in essays all the time, and they don't like it when we ask them, but internally they want to know, like, where do I fit? What am I going to do? Who the heck am I? So these were the things that teenagers said were the most important things to learn in high school, and that when they weren't addressed, affected their motivation. Michael, is there anything to add before I go on?
You're doing great.
Okay. How am I doing on time? I guess I could look on my watch.
We're only about 27 minutes in.
Excellent. All right. So the 3 biggest obstacles to motivation, I'm going to go and share with you now some quotes, some actual statements from these kids. These were the 3 main things in that area. Relationships. So it's a kid I met in Oklahoma City, and this is what he said. I'm going to read it out loud, because sometimes when people are in these conferences, they're moving around, they're in their office or their classroom or their kitchen or whatever, and they may not be looking at the screen. So pardon me, I'm not meaning to talk down to you and read slides. I know reading slides isn't a fun thing, but this is why I read the slides, okay? I'd probably say drama is the biggest obstacle, mostly with peers. You always have a group of friends, and there's always 2 people mad at each other. And then it kind of spreads out throughout the group and creates all this, whatever you call it, I don't know, stress. When stuff like that happens, it's just on your mind, and you can't really focus on school very well. And this happens a lot, and almost constantly for some kids, this peer stress. And therefore, it affects their motivation. I've got a friend who's on Facebook, a teacher, who just rails on kids, on his students on Facebook, about how they don't do what they're supposed to do. And I just want to sit him down and have a conversation with him about this stuff, because there are other, and not an excuse, it's just a reality. There are other things that are getting in the way of a child being able to focus on their schoolwork. And the more that we're aware of that, and the more that we develop connection with those kids, and they know we're aware of it, and we're empathetic toward it and deal with it, then we can get them to the place where they're able to engage academically. And this is one of the things that came out of this project. So Nathaniel was the one that I referenced earlier, who was this teenage father. It was pouring. I'm going to the Capitol for this interview with this intern, and it's pouring, and I duck under this awning of this building, and he's there with a friend. And I told him about the project, and I said, "Can I interview you?" He said, "Yeah." So he said, "I was always an A student, but I always had to show people I couldn't stay in class. I was one of them types of bad people. I wasn't bad in class, but I was bad when I come out. You know what I'm saying? It's just when you get to the hallways and you get around your friends, it's like your mindset just gone. You're not that person no more." So that's like basically what happened. Any conversation about any of these, let me know, just blurt it out, and we can talk about it. Lack of choice, lack of academic choice. Brooker said, "If I could figure out what I'm interested in, I'd be much more willing to do schoolwork. Yeah, I would love to explore interests. That's what I wish high school would do. That's what the last 2 years of high school at least should be about, figuring out what you want to do, exploring different options." This is a girl that I met on a reservation in South Dakota. She said, if I could change anything about high school, it would be to actually learn what we want to learn. I want to learn how to be a therapist, a counselor. I like to talk to people about their problems. So I'm imagining Haka may be in a class where she's not totally engaged, or maybe she misses assignments, or maybe she doesn't participate in discussions or whatever. And the teacher might assume, oh, she doesn't care about learning. Not necessarily true. And I think we all know this. Like, I'm not giving you anything you don't know. It's logical. But at the same time, when we hear their voices, it hits a little differently. This is a so this is a kid that I met at a gifted academy where I teach in the summer. And during the trip, I came down there and met with them and did a workshop with them. And I won't read it all, but I'll read the red parts, okay? You can read it if you'd like, obviously, because the red part is what relates to this particular topic. And they should let us pick what we want to study at least some of the time. And they need to allow kids to explore their passions instead of just studying for tests all the time, so they can learn how to actually do what they want to do. So you can see these themes come out. You can imagine dozens and dozens of interviews. These similar comments are coming out, then it's starting to teach me, hey, this is what kids are really interested in. And I went into this not with preconceived ideas. I mean, obviously I had some thoughts, some philosophies about teaching about teenagers, but I tried to go into this being completely open-minded, and I learned a lot in that process. So this is the one that super bothered me. Like, I heard this a lot on the first little trip during spring break, and I hoped that it wouldn't continue, but it did pretty much throughout the whole trip. It's a young man that I met in Times Square. He's a student who goes to school at a private school in Mexico, who's at a summer camp in Montreal, who's on a field trip in New York. And so this is what he said. Sometimes teachers don't explain things well enough. Adults think that we can do a lot of things that we can't. There's some things that are too difficult for us, and they're constantly telling us to do it. We need help in some cases, but they don't want to help. They want us to be alone and do it by ourselves. Sometimes we need help. Instead, they often say, just figure it out. So I know what's behind this, because I've probably said this many times. There's value in thinking through something and coming up with the solution yourself. Our job as teachers and parents is to frame situations to guide students to be able to do that, not just to say, oh, go figure it out. But more and more students that I talked to on this trip said this kind of thing. I just need a little bit more help. I don't want to know the answers. I just need some guidance. It's a girl I met on her break in a Burger King in Pennsylvania. Most teachers don't actually try to teach the students, more like using videos and technology rather than trying to talk to each one of them and help them through. I want to go to med school, but the biology teachers are boring. They just put stuff up on a screen and talk. They don't teach. So there are a couple things in this interview that I want to, or this little excerpt I want to pull out, where she says, rather than trying to talk to each one of them, this comes up in years and years of talking with teenagers about this topic. They want to be talked with teachers, not necessarily about schoolwork. They just want to talk, and they want the teachers to get to know them. And this is hugely important in their motivation and their willingness to engage in class, to believe that the teacher is actually interested in them. So sometimes students will say, oh, most of my teachers don't care. And they're not saying that teachers are not caring about their kids. They're saying teachers aren't investing into kids' lives. They aren't actively engaging and asking about their lives. Yet I didn't realize the extent to which this is a thing until this trip. Riley, this is one of the most powerful quotes that I heard. Some adults say, okay, they're younger, so we don't have to respect them. But I think that's what kills people's confidence. They don't get respected like they should. I think everybody at any age, any race, or anything should be respected the same amount as anybody else. Most of my teachers are pretty good, but it only takes one to really crush somebody. So a kid I met in Little Rock dribbling a basketball down the sidewalk. I pulled in a parking lot, and he was with a friend, and I approached him and I said, you know what I said. I asked him about the project, and this is what Trey said. Some teachers care, most of them don't. 30 that care, 70 just want a paycheck. So I'm like, y'all don't care? I don't care. It's a man of few words, but pretty powerful statement. Okay, so now we're transitioning to what's most important in high school. So these are the 5 things, roughly summarize the 5 things that were the most commonly talked about. What is happiness and how do I find it? Why do I behave this way? How do I control it? How do I make friends and find love and keep both? How do I survive and thrive on my own? And how do I figure out who I am and what I'm supposed to do? So these are excerpts addressing those. And I'll be hopefully finish in enough time to have some conversation with you about this. So happiness. Bryce, I'm still in touch with Bryce. Some of these people I've maintained contact with. Bryce is going to University of Florida now. And he literally, this picture is the epitome of who this kid is. Like, he exudes this vibe just being around him. This is what he said. My biggest problem is figuring out what I want to do with my life. I just want to be happy. Humanity just wants to be happy. We need to find whatever makes us happy and run with it. Emotions and how to control. This is the girl that gave me the haircut. You can see on her arms the tattoos. You can't read them, but you can see those tattoos. Without a doubt, the most important thing kids can learn in high school is how to control their emotions. I was a wreck in high school. Most of my friends were too. There was no roadmap, no instructions for us to handle our emotions. Trial and error is all. Nick said social skills, like how to talk with people, maintain relationships, that's super important. The most important, probably. Life can throw a lot of crap at you. When you can't get along with people, it kind of insulates you from everything else. And again, and I haven't really mentioned this, but those who do research on motivation adolescence are probably seeing, obviously, duh. It totally aligns with the research. The problem, I'm in my 23rd year of teaching, is that school isn't structured to do the things that the research and the kids are saying are most important. And it can be with very, very little investment or change in the model. It can be. I'm curious, Michael, and others, Anna, and any other professors, any researchers, research scientists in here, what you have to say about some of the things you're hearing that kids are saying.
I'll start just to help the interactivity. I think you make a great point in that a lot of these things are things that the theory would suggest. So I'm seeing these great quotes and being able to say, like, yeah, that's exactly, like, that's the sense of belonging that kids needs. Or in terms of choice, that's feelings of autonomy that are so important for motivation. You need to feel like you have control over your own life, and giving kids choice allows them to do that. But I think you have this really key insight here, which is that a kid can say something and a researcher can say something, but then if we look at the school environment, is it the match between those? So what exactly Chris is saying is that we have this body of research that's hidden in an ivory tower, and we have what kids need, and what we need to do is then figure out that middle step, which is like, how do we make the schools support that? We have, I'm sorry, I'm going to mispronounce your name, Nasashe has a question. If you want to unmute yourself, you can ask your question or add your thoughts to this.
It's Nasishe. Good morning.
Thank you.
The challenge that I see within the K-12 environment is testing. Many of the teachers recognize that there needs to be a rapport with the students, that there is more to the educational process than testing. Unfortunately, we are held to that by our administrators, and it compromises our ability to be as successful with our students as we would be were we allowed to do what we know is the right thing for them and on their behalf.
I am so glad you said that, because I could not agree more with that. And it's sometimes I think I don't do a good job. I think I maybe portray teachers as doing bad things when it is a byproduct of the situation that they're in. And you're exactly right. But there's another point to this too, and that is, given that opportunity to do those things that we all know we need to do, build connection, give autonomy, we're not trained on how to do that. So we know, like, we've read the books, we've gone to the conferences, we've taught in the classroom, and we know how valuable connections are. What I've learned from this project is that the choice of words, the simple sentence, a brief 15-second interaction with a kid can radically impact their motivation in positive or negative ways. And this is the thing that isn't being really addressed in professional development or pre-service programs, and it's huge. What kids are saying is this is absolutely huge, these little interactions. So even if that didn't change, even if we're continually in this test-heavy environment where the so-called best schools are determined by test scores and the so-called failing schools have bad test scores, which I think is entirely bogus and unsubstantiated. Even if we're in that, we can't escape that. We can do some of these things these kids are asking if we're trained how to do it, if we approach this in a way as what is most important, what is developmentally for an adolescent most important. I maintain, and I don't have the tools to be able to do this, I'm not a researcher and I'm older, so I don't have the time, but if you were to take 25% of the content out of schools, out of a high school, 25% of the content you cut, and you incorporate other things that kids are saying and scientists, that the research world is saying is healthy for adolescent development and learning, they'd be more motivated and learn more. So you could take 25% of the content out and they would learn more. And I believe that absolutely 100%. I don't have a way to test that. Maybe someone else will, maybe they're already doing it. But I do believe that if we ever get to that point, we could still survive in that test environment, produce high test scores, increase test scores, and still address the needs that the kids need.
Next comment coming from Luis.
Hello, good morning to all. I'm not a teacher, I'm an engineer, I'm retired, so I do mentoring. I've been doing mentoring for 7 years, and mentoring kids from middle school to high school. And I have found out that, of course, some of the mentees are from the economical levels of disadvantage, and some of them didn't even speak the language when they started. So what I found with these kids is basically a big edge between these kids and the rest of the population. And there is a gap, and the gap is quite large in terms of emotional support, financial support, educational support. So I've been doing our mentoring sessions. I have focused in these areas, and by coincidence, some of these areas. Who am I? How do I control my emotions? How do I get better? What do I expect in life? So those are things that are not taught in the school, and that need to be somehow incorporated. And I think mentoring has been a great avenue for me, at least for me, to do that. And I find that these kids, and now after 7 years, I have seen some of them graduated from high school and moving on to college, that it's needed, and that mentoring, and I'm just pitching here for mentoring. Mentoring is a great tool, and we can do a lot of help for these kids, because advisors and counselors at our schools are overworked, so they don't have the time to do that. Not even advising for college is properly done. So that's my 2 cents. And thank you for your research and for your passion for these kids. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that comment. I could not agree with you more.
Priya has the next comment.
First of all, I wanted to say, Chris, thank you so much. I resonated with all the comments from the students, and your, the presentation has been amazing to hear what I truly believe in. I think one important thing that came out of me, for me was, I'm teaching the kids right from the age of 3 up to 106, I guess. I'm a tertiary educator, plus starting from very young. What I think has been very important for me is to respect the kids or the adults on their own level, and the communication. When we are going as an educator to, we are not going it as showing them as that we have a power over them, but we are actually a facilitator in learning and communicating something that is on their level. So teenagers are going through a lot of changes in their life. And if we just step back just a moment back in our own, even though they are not from the same generation, where they are going through a different phase in terms of technology, social media, distractions, and peer pressures, the same as us as an educators who was like a decades ago, or maybe not. But I think the communication is very important in the same level. What our expectations are, what are the rules of the game, and if those expectations are not being given on their own level and communicated, the teenagers find it quite frustrating. I think that's my take on these things. And I can talk about that for another hour, but I probably don't want to. But I think I just thoroughly enjoyed your session, and I hope it makes sense what I said.
Thank you. It totally makes sense. I feel like I'm preaching to the choir. Like all of us should get together and we do our own group presentation. Probably not giving you any new insight, just supporting what you already know.
We have a comment from the chat, just generally about how philosophy for children should spread out in schools to touch those subjects teens need to explore. Do you have anything to add to that? And then we've got a few more hands. So Leah Samuelson, you're up next.
Hi, Chris. I'm really motivated by what you're saying, and I was crying a little bit, laughing a little bit. Thank you so much. So I'm coming from an arts for social change background, and I'm really attracted to your idea of the prospect of cutting 25% of the current content out of high schools to make space for other things. And where my interest goes is going upstream to this idea of working with the adults, of like what would make us willing to do that. And my idea is we can work with the administrators and the teachers and even the parents and get them involved in little sample art projects where we can experiment with taking risks and just practice that muscle. What does it look like to make changes? What does it look like to do things that are unexpected and wade a little bit into these unknown territories? And that if we can have smaller practices where we can ask adults to do these hard things, that maybe they would then be exercised to a place of readiness where we could then take these risks in writing our high school curricula.
Yeah, that's all very, very exciting. You know, I think so much of what this comes down to, all these different so-called non-academic things are thinking things. And really what we're talking about is transitioning to an educational model that focuses on thinking and creativity. And that then opens up any content whatsoever. And what you're talking about to me sounds like a way to touch into, and you know, when we talk about social emotional and they talk about the so-called soft skills, I hate that term. And I hate differentiating between, oh, it's cognitive and then there's social emotional, and how are they not intertwined? How are we not talking about exactly the same thing? And so these other things that aren't sit in the classroom, listen to this information, regurgitate it, take a test. How are we saying this other stuff is not potentially academic? It's totally academic. All these different activities can be very, very academic and lead to learning and lead to motivation.
Got another comment.
So I've got like, this could be a 2-hour presentation. I prefer this conversation over sharing more stuff. I just wanted to check with everybody on where we're at. I would love to hear these comments. I think they're more valuable probably than me going through. You get a sense, I think, of what this project is, but I'll take your lead on this, Michael.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of engagement. So I'm going to keep it in the comments here. Sanan has a hand raised, and then we've got a few questions in the chat.
Hi, Chris. So, like everyone else, I was quite affected by the research you did, and I was actually thinking about my teenage years. And you said in the beginning of your presentation that you said that the teenagers' brains, even though they keep developing in the context of emotional regulation, they were quite good. And I think the fact that you did this interview and they were able to come up with this insightful and quite moving quotes, it's happened because you asked the question. But when they're with themselves, thinking to themselves, I don't think they're as insightful, but rather they are quite harsh on themselves. So I was thinking, whether, I mean, you said that the things the students shared agrees with the literature, but I mean, what I'm curious is whether you had a similar change of feeling talking. I mean, you were a teacher, of course, but asking these questions and receiving these answers, did that change the way you look at the existing knowledge you had, or did that
Yeah.
change any of your feelings towards it?
I think it evolved, it deepened it, it enriched it. I don't think anything that I thought changed, like, oh, I was, missing that. It just, it brought to light some things I didn't realize were as important as they said they were. But I've always had and many teachers, super good relationships with my kids. A lot of what we're talking about, what they said, is my pedagogy. It's how I approach it. But I'm so much better having had these conversations because of the insight that they've provided and how they've shared that. And just asking them. I mean, there probably should be, just like a company, right? A company wouldn't dare not do market research. Like, what company would be successful if they didn't find out from their customers what they wanted, what they liked and what they didn't like, what they needed? That's what they do. They spend millions and millions of dollars on market research. We don't do that. Like, education doesn't do that. We don't go to the kids, the teenagers, who cognitively can do phenomenal things. Their brains are so capable, 16, 17 years old. They're so capable, but we don't go to them and ask for their information, for their insight, for their experiences. It's such a missed opportunity. And if we did that, then we would simply be so much better at what we do. And it's not that we're doing it wrong or that we have a wrong idea. I don't think that I had a wrong idea going into this project, but I'm so much better having had these conversations with these kids.
We have a question from the chat, just generally, what do you think of lifelong learning? And do adults and young learners, you mentioned you kind of talk to younger folks and older folks as you progress, do they differ or do they have shared insights?
But I think of lifelong, I mean, I wouldn't say we should be all lifelong learners. I think there are probably some adults who get out of school and think, oh, I'm done. And that's such a short-sighted, probably even a dangerous way to approach life, is to think you're done learning. We talk about this a lot with the kids. So with my work and what I'm trying to do in this new program at the high school is to develop a way to track the kids into adulthood, to gauge their self-perceptions, to gauge their subjective happiness, to actually take health readings and document this in a longitudinal way long after they leave high school, to then inform us, what are we doing in school that is impacting this? What are we doing in school that isn't impacting this? So I talk with my students all the time about post high school and what that looks like. I think school, especially when we get to high school where kids are thinking more about this, should prepare students for adulthood as much as give content about things that you should know, and try to marry the two. But the whole point is to try to get an adolescent to thrive, and we thrive by continuing to learn. So I don't know if that answers your question, but lifelong learning should be what it's all about.
Another question from, response that is, ideally, we should all be lifelong learners. And thanks for the help for that response. We are getting close to the end, so I'm going to throw up. Okay, so is there anything, we can keep going with questions. Is there any concluding thoughts that you want to give us, Chris? You could also put those up. I know that there are many other questions, but if you want to kind of maybe wrap us up, that might be the best way to go here.
Yeah, I have lots and lots, but for the sake of time, I don't. So let me pull this back up, and I'm just going to fast forward. You can see that, right? I'm going to go to some things that I wanted to share.
We can't see a screen yet.
Oh, sorry. I'll get there. Share screen. Boom. Okay.
Now we can.
All right. So this young man here, met him in a smoke shop, in New York. And he kind of nailed, he talked my ear off. He would not stop talking. He said, the most important thing you can learn in school is who you are. And I heard this from this man too. And he was, and again, I interviewed a lot of adults, and we didn't have time to talk about the adults, but the adult interviews provided context. So the adults could say, this is where I was academically, motivationally in high school, and this is what happened because of it. So we didn't have that with the teenagers, right? So I started increasing the number of adults I interviewed. So anyway, this man here, I just wanted to go, I was tired, it was Delaware. I wanted to go in and get some almonds and a water, get on an airplane. I had a place I needed to be, and I wasn't planning on interviewing anybody. I was exhausted. And I'm standing in line, and I'm thinking, gosh, Chris, you're out here, you're doing this. What a waste of an opportunity not to talk to absolutely anybody you encounter. So I told him about the project. And this is what he said. There's a lot of peer pressure in high school, a lot of conformity in high school. There's not much finding the self. You get taught so much, you get so much information crammed into your head, but you don't get time to figure out who you are. And so I asked him, I said, Christian, do you know who you are now? And he said, yeah, I finally do. And I said, can I ask how you know that? How did that happen? He said, I got shot. And he talked about how he was running with this bad crowd. And he got shot. He was doing illegal things and he got shot. And obviously he lived, but when he said he got up, no one was around, like his friends were gone, and they abandoned him. And he said, this isn't how I want to live. So I said, what do you do now? He says, I go to high schools and talk about this. And I thought, oh my gosh, what are the chances? I just wanted almonds and a water. But anyway, I want to end with these 3 interviews. So one of the most impactful days was in New Orleans. It was my birthday. I thought, I'm just going to go out and have fun. And of course, I ended up doing interviews. And this is Jack. And if you've ever been to French Quarter, you might have seen Jack. Like, these people are staples there. And so Jack writes poetry. And so I told Jack, I said, hey, if you could write a poem to people who run schools, what would you say? And so within 5 minutes, he wrote this poem. Who could have thought high school rules, best laid by wonks who'd spent decades forgetting their locker combination, policy dictated by souls who'd become comfortable walking the wider halls of Congress? Who could have imagined a body aged could keep a brain fresh enough to offer answers to a life they've not known? Give the children their due. Answers are discovered in experience. I'm like, oh my gosh, thanks. So he says the most important thing for kids to learn in high school is community, if they can, if they have a chance to do it, building healthy relationships with people next to you like this. Then I went across the street and I talked to Adalyn, who's an artist, and she said, speak up, be brave. Even if they think you're wrong, you should say it, because there could be somebody else right next to you thinking the same thing. It's good to tell people what you're thinking so you can recognize how connected people are. And around the corner in an alley was Murphy. This is all within like 200 feet of each other. And Murphy's playing music. And this is what Murphy says. I guess the easiest way to put it, this really sums up the whole project. I guess the easiest way to put it is you're not expected to be finished with who you are. The most useful thing you can learn in high school is that it is not the end all be all. Your grades, though important and maybe even defining of your future in some regards, shouldn't shake you to your core, because that's not finalized yet.
Well, that's a great place to end. I want to make sure that we get a chance for everybody to thank Chris for his amazing work and sharing it with us and taking the time. So put those little clapping emojis in the chat. But thank you all for coming. I think this is going to kick us out any second now.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you for attending.